revolution in talk radio. Liberty Talk Radio, where the critical thinking will defrag your mind of propaganda-ridden viruses induced by mass media news programming. No BS here, just the facts.
And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome, everyone, to Liberty Talk Radio, America's libertarian voice, broadcasting from our beautiful studio in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to around the world. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and this is your antidote to popular talk radio. This broadcast is being brought to you live, and I need today's date. What is today's date? 26. It's Thursday morning, February 26, 2015. It is now about 8:01 a.m. Central Time in what was once known as the good old USA. Before we get started, I'd like to remind our listeners to subscribe to our reminder service by visiting our website and clicking on the subscribe icon. And for those of you who tweet, our Twitter address is @LibertyJoe. Now on to our show. Folks, today we would like for you to make use of your telephones or your iPhones or your Androids or whatever and call in with any questions that you might have of our guest. Our toll-free number is 888-773-4496. Those of you on a cell phone number can use our direct number, 646-6524-620. That's 646-652-4620 or 888-773-4496. This morning, we are pleased and honored to have as our guest, in my opinion, one of America's bravest and most ardent freedom fighters. Every single citizen in the United States owes this gentleman a debt of gratitude, and I am one of them. His name is Paul Jacobs. He is a board member of Citizens in Charge Foundation. He specializes in citizens initiative, among other things. And in the interest of full disclosure, I am a financial supporter of his organization because I believe in the everything that he has done. He was also known as one of the Oklahoma. Was that Paul? Was that the Oklahoma Three? That was the Oklahoma Three, in which a petition was being sent around, and he and the petitioners were going to be jailed. Were you in jail at all, Paul, during that period of time? Did you spend any time?
I spent about 3 hours being processed, about an hour or half of that handcuffed to a bench in the police station. So I had a little taste of our criminal justice system.
Okay, and all of this because the petitioners that he was using, from what I recall, they had temporary addresses here in Oklahoma in order for them to be petitioners. But then, of course, the law gets twisted and turned by those people who are serving us, by the way. The public service that are serving us said, well, geez, they're not permanent residents of Oklahoma. Thus, these are illegal petitions, and this man should be flogged, thrown in jail, and maybe persecuted and given the electric chair. And that's so much for democracy and the American way of life. And Paul, thank you so much for being on this program. It's an honor and a privilege to have you.
Well, and I appreciate it very much, Joe, and your support and all you do on the radio. I should tell your listeners that really I think the most important thing about what happened in Oklahoma with the Oklahoma Three was the attempt by your former Attorney General, who now, thank goodness, is a private citizen, Drew Edmondson, to, in essence, scare people into not doing petition drives. We had an initiative that would have put a state spending cap on. It was opposed by the powerful public employee unions. It was also opposed by a lot of very wealthy Republican donors who like what I call daddy welfare in public subsidies for stadiums and things like that. And they did not want the citizens of Oklahoma to vote on this measure. It was interesting because the people running the effort went to state officials and asked if what they were doing was okay. I live in Virginia. I was an advisor. Really, the Attorney General went after me because I had a relationship with some of the donors around the country who were part of a national effort to do these measures, and they wanted to threaten them. And one of the things that I take note of is that after a year and a half of having an indictment over my head threatening me and two other people with 10 years in prison, we had never completed even a preliminary hearing. No judge had ever looked at these charges and said there was even enough evidence to take us to trial. And frankly, I don't think there was. So it was really nothing but a threat and intimidation tactic. And I just look again and again throughout the country. There was a story recently about this Social Security Administration attempting to collect debts from children who 30 years ago got Social Security benefits that were sent to their parents. In some cases, the government was trying to, and when I say trying to collect, they stole these people's state and federal tax returns without any process whatsoever, much less due process. And in some cases, they had taken the parents to court and had lost. But instead of giving up and saying, wait a second, okay, obviously we don't have a legitimate debt we can collect, they were threatening and stealing money from the kids. And I mentioned that it's one of a zillion stories. I guess I don't need to go on to convince people that our government is completely out of control. But I see it again and again. And it's no longer about a little waste or fraud in the government. It is about a dangerous monster that we had better get control of, or the idea that we live in a free and harmonious country is out the window.
Right. You know, I expect nothing less than that from our government. Now, I'm going to be entering 72 years old in the next couple of weeks, few weeks. And I've come to the conclusion that we have lost entirely what the American the precepts of the American Constitution, of the Declaration of Independence, all of that is out the window. It just floors me that you can write the Declaration of Independence in about 2 pages. I mean, if you had a large handwriting, the Constitution could be done in about a dozen pages. If you had large handwriting, and that's the law of the land, and that's all we need. And yet, every year, over 70,000 pages of legislation hit the desk of our congressmen just less than 24 hours before the vote. Of course, they have no time to do anything with it. And who thinks now? How could you run an entire country, or have had run a country for decades on 12 pages, a 12-page document, and yet today we cannot run a country with over 1 million pages of documents?
Well, I mean, you point out a really important thing. Not only are they passing laws that are thousands of pages long, but they're laws that nobody has read.
Right.
The Affordable Care Act was passed with a bill that they'd stripped out and put new language in. The whole passage of it was somewhat constitutionally questionable because it started in the Senate, really, not in the House. But when you look at it, you don't have to go very far once you realize that there are bills that are still being written when our legislators vote on them that virtually no one is reading the legislation, other than staff members who are sticking little tricky things into the language. I mean, it's not just that the outcomes are dangerous and way over the top. It's that the whole process is broken.
Yeah.
And as you know, I'm a longtime supporter of term limits. That's kind of the issue that I really cut my teeth on. I ran U.S. term limits for a decade or so. I'm still on the board of directors and still work on that issue through my group, Liberty Initiative Fund. Great issue. But whether you like it or don't like it, 80% of the American people in places like Oklahoma, in places like New York City, from Maine to California, Republican, Democrat, Independent, man, woman, white, black, Hispanic, whatever demographic groups you want to slice and dice, they all support term limits. But we don't have them. And we don't have them because the people who work for us, who are our servants, tell us, hell no, you can't have them. We're not going to give them to you. And where we passed them at the state level would sometimes take their constituents to court to try to overturn the vote. So we have a very sick body politic. And, we're still a very wealthy country compared to the rest of the world. But when people forget, how they got to where they are, it's very tough. We are not going to remain a wealthy country if the whole process, a fair or fairly fair. I mean, we've had problems throughout our whole history. Let's face it. We've never been a free country. We had slavery to start out with. I mean, there's no more negation of freedom than slavery. We then had 100 years of Jim Crow. We've had all kinds of things that women couldn't vote. We've had all kinds of problems. But for the most part, compared to the rest of the world, we have had a certain rule of law. We've had a less corruption because the public could counter some of the things they're doing. And we are losing it. And it's not just a couple of us, you and I, Joe, who follow these political things. Everybody knows it. Everybody knows it. And one of the reasons I'm so glad to be on your show today is because my wife calls them my arguing shows. In the evening after work, I come home and irritate my wife and daughters by watching some of these different arguing shows. And now they're talking about who's going to be the next president. And I am here to say that I'm almost certain the next president is not going to be committed to solving the problems of our country, whether it's the best candidate of the two major parties or the worst. And if you want to save America and not to restore it to some past place, but to create a free society going forward that's better than we've ever had before, and that gives everybody their rights and protects those rights and gives us and has a process by which we can maintain those rights against any politician who gets too big for his britches, we have to do it ourselves. And we have that process. 24 states have an initiative process where we can put something on the statewide ballot. Term limits, civil asset forfeiture reform, all kinds of police reforms, ending some of these crony capitalist bailouts of the rich. There's all kinds of things that we can do. In the other states, almost all of them have a pretty vibrant process at the local level. So in your city, you can do something about it when they decide they're going to subsidize the billionaire owner of the sports team by taking from hardworking taxpayers who are working two jobs to benefit this wealthy team. I'm a huge sports fan. My goodness, those of us who are fanatical sports fans, we are more than willing to pull out our wallet and pay for our entertainment. And the idea that we would force people who don't happen to like football or basketball or baseball to pay for our entertainment just makes me literally sick to my stomach. The good news is we can do something about it, and that's really what Liberty Initiative Fund is all about, helping people at the local level, at the statewide level, to start taking back our government. I think Washington is gone. It is gone. Nothing good is going to happen in Washington.
Absolutely.
Until we take back our state and local governments and the people and our state and local governments are on the same team fighting to get our federal government under control.
Right. You know, we just to give an illustration of what you're talking about, just yesterday I was working on one of my company's savings accounts, IRAs, for the employees. And, of course, the company contributes X percent, and then the employees have options and whatever. And I realized after, it had to be 20 years, that technically I made a mistake in the way I was calculating it. Although the employees overall made a lot more money. But technically, I didn't do it the right way and didn't realize it until I went back because we're hiring new people and whatever. And I realized that. I said, oh, my God. I said, do you know, if I get audited, although the employees actually made more money my way, technically I wasn't on the right line item. I'll go to jail. I mean, they'll close me up. And that's all I kept on thinking of, is the government's going to shut me down because I overpaid my employees because I put it in the wrong line item. And you have no idea how much sleep I've lost on that. And I wasn't saying this like flippantly. I was really concerned. I said, my God, if I ever get audited, I'm going to jail. I'm going to jail for overpaying my employees, but I'm on the wrong line item. This is how bad it's become. This is the very first time since the Great Depression, I think even before the Great Depression, that the number of jobs, the number of companies that are opening, right, and the number closing are exceeding the number of jobs opening. In other words, we have more and more people getting out of business because it's not worth it. It's not worth it for me because every time I do something, I have to worry about some legal or technical aspect of it that could wind me, can withdraw all the money from my account, can put me in jail, can put me into litigation. It's just not worth it. And it's not a matter of, intentionally scheming to screw the employees out of a few bucks. It's a stupid mistake. They can still close you down. And I know that's the case. I know the government would not say, oh, I understand. Boy, God bless you, that you did. I shouldn't be saying this on the air,
No, there is a tremendous fear, and it's not a fear that, I did something wrong. You make a mistake, any reasonable person would that they may look at some rule and apply it as if they're a machine instead of a human being who can think.
Right.
And we see it again and again and again. Let me tell you a case, and this is it's an interesting case for me because there's a woman, a Dr. Annette Bosworth in South Dakota, who is facing 24 years in prison for 6 petitions that she turned in with 36 signatures, where she signed the circulator statement saying she witnessed the people signing the petition.
Right.
But it turns out she did not. And, I believe that when people commit fraud in petitions and actually do something wrong, that it is important that we enforce those laws.
Right.
But this is a case where she was collecting those signatures at her doctor's office. One of the 36 people who signed was her sister. She went on a trip to help the typhoon victims in the Philippines and was gone for 2 weeks. And some of those people signed it at her office. Now, they were patients. They were people she knew.
Right.
She literally asked her attorney for her campaign, do I need to reconnect with these people and get them to sign again, or what do I do? And the attorney said, oh, no, that's ridiculous. No problem. Well, I think that she did something wrong. And I think that in a reasonable world, in the America that we all kind of think we're supposed to be living in, she would face some fine or something.
Right.
What they are trying to do, because of course she happened to run against the Republican establishment in a very Republican-controlled state. She ran for U.S. Senate. They are trying to steal her medical license because if they can convict her of one felony, her license is gone. She works with the poor, helping people. Why on earth would we want to threaten this woman, first of all, with 24 years in prison? That's ridiculously excessive. Why would we want to deny poor people a doctor who cares and who's giving them treatment? It's insane. And this is not some of the crazy things you and I have talked about where the Social Security comes in and tries to, steal money from people who supposedly their parents got some benefit 30 years ago, or these cases of civil asset forfeiture where they literally go in and steal someone's bank account with no charge, no conviction. But it's just again and again, we see a certain insanity in our government. And there's no way to solve that except for people getting involved. If the people in my neighborhood got together to solve some issue, I might disagree with how they solve it, but I know they're not going to be insane about it.
Right.
I know that they have the same interest as I do, and we can all have different opinions. But our problem in America is not that we have different opinions. It's not that the country's split 50% liberal and 50% conservative. there are all kinds of issues out there where we agree overwhelmingly. Some of these police issues about putting cameras on police, which I think would help the police and would also help the public.
If I was a cop, I would want one on and say, go ahead. And now try to indict me, you know. And
the studies show it, and the police in places where they've used it, it shows it, although a lot of the police unions are still fighting it.
Right.
These civil asset forfeiture, where our government literally steals people's property with no charge and no conviction. Right. That is so fundamentally un-American. These things are not supported by the right or the left. They're not supported by anybody but the folks in government who are taking the money. And in talking to some of the folks who've worked on civil asset forfeiture, they tell me that if the money doesn't go into the police budget, and I think it needs a lot more reform than simply this change, but they said if you simply change the law to where the money being seized or the cars or boats or whatever, the proceeds from that goes to the general fund instead of the police fund, they say about 90% of the problem goes away. This is a situation in which we're allowing people in government to steal. And not only is that wrong, but what kind of police department are we going to have after 10 years or 20 years or 30 years of them basically behaving like thieves? Right. We're going to have a police department we can't trust. And I think in some of the poorer communities, I think in minority communities, they already know what the result of that is. Right. I think the rest of us are starting to find out, and it's wrong, and it's got to stop. But trust me, it's not going to stop by magic. It's not going to stop because we elect a president on a white horse.
Right.
It's not going to stop because the Republicans swept in or the Democrats swept in. It's going to stop when the folks in power realize that the real power, the public, is awake and has a clipboard in their hand to collect signatures, or is on the phone saying, by golly, you better do what's right to their servants, because these folks are not our servants. They think they're our rulers, and if we don't stand up, then they are going to become our rulers.
Yeah, aren't they so disingenuous? Because if in fact we had insight into what was done every single hour or maybe every minute of every day in the Senate, the Congress, the executive branch, and we were privy to the conversations going on, I would venture to say that most of what is going on is unconstitutional and or illegal.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, look at the.
I mean, this woman would go to jail for signatures. I mean, that would be such a minor. It wouldn't even make the chart. Everything they do is so much more egregious, and they get away with it. And then even when they're indicted, they come up with some answer, and it just goes away. No one goes to jail.
Yes. Well, look at some of these police shootings, and I think some of them, it's hard to know. I don't know what happened exactly in Ferguson, and if the police acted badly, we found out at the end, I wouldn't be shocked. And if the police acted totally appropriately in the end, I wouldn't be shocked. I think there's others, but the child in Cleveland who had the toy gun.
Yep.
And they said, well, he wouldn't put it down or he was threatening. Well, then you see the video. And literally, that car wasn't stopped for 2 full seconds before he was gunned down. This is a 12-year-old.
Right, yeah.
The man who was in a Walmart with a toy gun they sell in Walmart, who police walked in and shot him down. Now, it may be that the policeman just made a mistake, but there has to be some process by which, if your mistake is to gun somebody down, you pay a certain price. And in most of these cases, the police are still on the job.
That's right.
So, we have some serious problems, I think, in policing. And, the public is always going to be, I think, give the policeman, the public official, the benefit of the doubt. But we have to have these aren't problems where we have a few bad actors. These are problems where we have a system that has completely broken down.
That's correct.
And the only thing holding it together is the good actors. Right. If you're a bad actor, it's this is the best of all possible worlds.
If you're a good actor, then you're vilified. Now, I want to place blame somewhere. and this is going to be a blanket statement, but I'll stick by it. If we had a press that was not owned by the government, questions would be asked of all of these situations. For example, when a congressman is given a 4,000-page document, which is a legislation, and is being asked to vote on it within 24 hours, and there's 2,000 or 3,000 pages. I mean, one page would be difficult to read because it references other legislation. You have to do research, and even if you did it, you probably would not truly understand what it's saying, even if you had all the time in the world to study it. And they're saying, vote on this tomorrow. If we had a press, any press at all, that's why I never watch the regular news anymore. It's all garbage. It's swill. The first question that the press would bring forward to the people saying, Congressman so-and-so was presented with a 2,400-page document 20 hours before voting. Now, folks, we want to know why was this document presented only 20 and not a year in advance? At least a year in advance, because that's how long it would take. And once they start asking those questions, and when the congressman left the chambers, there was the press corps saying, why did you put it on his desk just 20 hours? What did you expect of this person? And they start hammering this guy, and they don't, because the press is complicit, and they can do anything, and the press would color it up, and they say, and then they make it seem as if these people are gods, and how dare the press nor anyone else in the world ever question these people because they're godlike. I blame the press.
I hate to, in a sense, blame the press. For one, because you're blaming all kinds of people, and it's this, it's kind of like if everybody's at fault, no one's at fault.
Right. No, I understand that. Yeah.
However, I really agree with those sentiments. I think the press has by and large been horrible. And I know that when I was doing term limits, oftentimes when I would talk to the Capitol beat reporters, and I would think after about 15 minutes of them making snide comments and arguing with me, I'd say, did you have some questions for me? Or did you just call to berate me? And I thought, why are they so tight with the legislators? Well, that's who they're hanging out with.
Right.
And that's who they're talking to all the time. They don't talk to the public. They don't know where the public is. And oftentimes they're told by elected officials, well, the public's all stupid and so on. I think, and I have a lot of friends who I'll hear say, well, it's the public's fault. We voted for them. But I'll go back and I'll say, okay, which presidential election did we elect the president who said, I'm going to deficit spend, I'm going to raise your taxes, I'm going to make a bigger government to do a whole lot more? I don't think we've ever done that.
Right.
Mr. Obama won because he was the peace candidate.
Right.
No, he didn't say, I'm coming in to have a huge government. In fact, it was really Hillary Clinton who was pushing the health care.
Right.
Obama was kind of a step or two or three behind on health care.
That's correct.
His main message was, we got to get out of these stupid wars.
Right.
And the American people wanted that. So now we elect Obama. Aren't we in a stupid war in the Middle East that nobody, some people are arguing we need to fight it harder. But of course, I think we could go in there and wipe out ISIS. Yeah. However, then what would happen? Then we'd still be standing there in the middle of this Iraqi-Syrian desert trying to make some government out of these folks. And I look at it and I say, we've got ISIS in the middle of this stupid desert. To the north are the Turks. The Turks aren't going to let them run over Turkey. To the east is Iran. Iran is not going to let ISIS just roll over them, and they're not going to let them roll over the Shiites in southern Iraq. And you've got Saudi Arabia. In other words, this is not our fight. But we have a president who's kind of halfway involved, who says he's fighting them, but mainly just seems to be dropping a lot of bombs on people who everybody admits won't solve the problem. And I look at this, I happen to believe, I'm a non-interventionist, as you know, Joe.
So am I. I'm very much so.
And I think we would have a better situation if we got out of there and let the people who live there handle it. And I think they could. In fact, I think they could better than us mucking it up. However, even if you believe the exact opposite, you have to recognize that the way we have pursued everything doesn't make any sense if you're the biggest hawk or the biggest dove. And then you look at who's doing it. It's the candidate who was elected to be the peace candidate, the candidate who won a Nobel Peace Prize before he hardly had sat down at the Oval Office desk.
Right.
And we see that again and again. Ronald Reagan ran for office way back when, saying he was going to balance the budget and cut government down to size. And he dramatically increased the size of the government and the deficit.
Right. He was the biggest spending president we've had. Paul, we have had someone hanging on the line, I just realized, for about 10 minutes. Could we take that call now?
Let's do.
Okay. Let's see if we can do this without me disconnecting someone, which I have a habit of doing. Caller, Exchange 298, you're on the air. Your first name and your question, please, or comment.
Morning, Joe. This is Jim from Bixby.
Jim, thank you for calling.
Yeah, and good morning to you, Paul. It's a privilege and honor to hear you and meet you over the internet. I've been listening since the top of the hour, and I'm just in agreement with the context of the discussion you guys are having. I had two topics that I've been holding for the last several minutes that you've somewhat touched on, but maybe you could expand. You were talking about local law enforcement and some of these shootings and all the issues surrounding that. I'm also very concerned about the militarization of local law enforcement and their acquisition of all these armored military vehicles. And, what's all that about? Are they preparing for civil unrest and riots? Are they wanting to, exert more force upon the local communities? That's very disturbing. And I wonder what your take is on that issue of the militarization of local law enforcement.
I think it's a terrible, terrible sign. I think when you give people weapons and these armored vehicles and so on, we all know that when people get toys, they like to use them, and these toys are going to be used against us. I am not afraid of my neighbors. I'm not afraid of my most liberal neighbors or most conservative neighbors. I'm not saying that there's not a crazy anywhere and that we don't have to protect ourselves. We do. But we have that protection. These armored vehicles and these SWAT teams running around knocking down doors and throwing flash grenades into the crib of a kid and blinding them or killing some older person who, when they break into the wrong house. I mean, we have all kinds of no-knock raids now, and a lot of it has come out of the war on drugs, which libertarians were way ahead of the curve in realizing this is not only wrong in public policy in terms of dealing with drug abuse, because you force it into the shadows and you create this huge profit center in drugs, but it's also destroying our police. It is corrupting our police forces across the country. And then when you see the militarization of it, as you point out, we are in deep trouble. This is a serious, serious problem. And of course, part of the reason they're getting all these things is because the federal government we've been involved in wars for, the last decade. And by every estimation, we're going to be involved in war forever. There's no thought given. I mean, every time they talk, the war against ISIS is going to take decades. We're going to be in Afghanistan.
I love your answer.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I love your passion and to your answer. And regarding these perpetual wars, let's say the war on terror is such a beautiful thing for the neocons and warhawks, because it implies a perpetual war, because there will always be terrorism.
Yes, and it's the kind of thing. Well, I heard the other day on TV that ISIS was the gravest threat. Some public officials said ISIS is the gravest threat we've ever faced. Now, does that make any sense whatsoever? We face some actually really grave threats, and it doesn't make sense. And yet, if they were, wouldn't we land troops on the ground and actually fight them? So we're constantly told things that we know aren't true. They're hype. They're misdirections. And it's everywhere from war and peace issues all the way down to our local police and the way they function. And that's why, what can we do about it has got to be our question. And to me, we've got to attack it right in our own hometown. And we can do it in almost, in 60% plus of the cities in this country. There is an initiative process. We don't have to beg any politician to fix it for us. We can put a measure on the ballot to fix some of these things, whether it's civil asset forfeiture, whether it's all these policing for profit schemes that are keeping the poor down. We can do something about it. And Liberty Initiative Fund, our website is libertyifund.org. We are working with people at the local level all across the country. We look forward to working with more folks. And I think that in my experience dealing with the folks in Washington, which, every time you do it, you want to take a shower and bop yourself in the head for even being involved with them. But the one thing that I think they do sometimes pay attention to is when people start agitating and doing things at the grassroots in their cities and states. And so if you want to fix Washington, I wouldn't suggest stepping foot in that city. I would suggest start fixing the state and local governments that you're part of.
I concur with you. And also, you mentioned about the SWAT teams. I don't have the statistics, the data in front of me, but I understand that the SWAT team house break-ins has increased exponentially, 10, 20-fold over the last decade or two. So, and like you said, sometimes they pick the wrong house, and they're normally, to try to do some type of drug bust where it's, it's not like there's Bonnie and Clyde are in the house ready to shoot back. It's just totally out of hand. I'd like to throw out one other topic, and then I'll listen to your answer offline. Is you and Joe talked about media and how complicit they are and supportive they are of big government and most of these wars. Thank God for the internet and shows like Liberty Talk Radio and things that you're doing. But what's your feelings on this the agenda and motives behind what might happen with this net neutrality issue? And I'd like to hear your response. And again, enjoyed meeting you over the phone, and continue to fight the good fight.
Thank you very, very much. I'm opposed to net neutrality, which doesn't sound like neutrality. Neutrality always sounds good. It doesn't with net neutrality, because what they in essence are doing, and I admit this is not my area of expertise, but having read some about it and followed this debate, it's being presented as a way to make the internet fair. And I think what it really is doing is handing control of the internet over to the government, where bureaucrats can decide that, I'm going to give them a special waiver to be able to do X, Y, and Z, but somebody else not. Or we're going to decide what's fair, and that might mean that certain businesses can't even buy the bandwidth to do what they need to do, but other businesses can. It's a serious problem, and I'm opposed to a government takeover of healthcare. I was never a fan of Obamacare, and I'm not today. But I think one of the worst aspects of it has been this idea that we're gonna have a law that certain people won't have to follow if they have enough political clout to get somebody in Washington to give them some special dispensation. That's not equal protection of the law. It shouldn't be allowed, but the courts have been terrible about actually enforcing the 14th Amendment and equal protection of the law. And when we see the government, like with Obamacare, deciding certain parts of it aren't going to go into effect after all, and deciding that they can pass a law and then pick and choose which parts of it they enforce, and pick and choose who they enforce it on and who they don't, that is arbitrary government. And that is the most tyrannical of any government. Even if a government passes a law that's stupid, it's better that they apply it to everybody, so that in essence, if it's stupid, we can all rise up together and undo it. When they pass laws that they can pick and choose who has to actually abide by them, then we have a society, not a government not of laws, but a government of men. And the men are those jokers in Washington, D.C. I mean, that's as scary as it can get.
Paul, we need to stop for station identification. We're past due. If you just hold on to just take a minute, okay? Don't go away.
Sounds
Thank
good.
you.
Liberty Talk Radio. Political talk derived from a historical perspective. Not always palatable, but good food for thought. Pure libertarian talk with host Joe Cristiano. LibertyTalkRadio.com.
Express Test is your go-to company for on-site occupational health testing services. That's right, we said on-site. That means we will meet you at your facility for a free health and occupational safety consultation. Express Test specializes in hearing conservation, respiratory protection, and employee safety. We can help you establish viable programs tailored to your business and employee needs. For your free consultation, call 918-743-2929 or visit us at expresstest.com. That's 918-743-2929 or expresstest.com. Do you find yourself asking, what did you say? Aaron Cristiano of Ranch Acres Audiology has over 25 years of experience helping patients just like you.
Hearing requires conservation. We need to be aware and we need to be responsible for our own hearing health.
Understand more with a little help from Ranch Acres Audiology. Call 918-749-7711. That's 918-749-7711 to learn more. We'd like to thank attorney Constance Squires for her support of Liberty Talk Radio. If you want a comprehensive way to affordably avoid legal issues, call Constance Squires. For a free consultation, call 918-254-9283 or go online at isthyWillDone.com.
This isn't your typical talk radio show. This is Liberty. Liberty Talk Radio.
Folks, we're back. We have on our video Paul Jacobs. He's one of the founders and members of the Citizens in Charge. He's a Citizens Initiative expert. He's probably one of America's foremost freedom fighters, and he deserves the honor, respect, and admiration of each one of us because he's fighting for each one of us, and we are pleased and honored to have him on our program. Paul, my area of expertise is not exactly the same as yours. I'm more of a monetarist. I like to study the monetary system, as difficult and as insane as it is. And it seems that today, whenever I listen to, in the few times I listen to mainstream media, which I limit to absolute minimum, and what they are telling us about our economy, about money itself, and reality are as far away as everything else we've talked about. Everything they talk about, net neutrality, whenever they say fairness, run. You know that fairness means I get everything, you get nothing, and I'll tell you if I give you some crumbs, and then you got to thank me for it. It's so plain to me, because I've studied this for 20 years, that we are on the same road as every country that has gone bust. I mean, you can almost, it's like taking two transparencies and put them over one another, and you find that the figurines fit perfectly. It looks like one figure. I was watching a documentary about the fall of the Roman Empire just a week ago, and everything they said, all the contributions to its fall, is exactly what we're doing. If they just said the United States instead of Rome, it would have been perfectly congruous in what they were saying. What's your take on that, being from sort of the another side of the issue? Not another side of the issue, but the different aspect of the issue.
No, I think, you've seen this quantitative easing, which is the Federal Reserve pumping up, buying bonds from local governments and basically keeping the economy liquid with a lot of cheap money. And yet it's still not, it's not as if we're in a boom. And at some point, they have to pull that back. And it seems like, I don't know whether it was 6 months ago or a year ago, but I remember there was some talk about the Federal Reserve stopping that and all of a sudden the stock market took a dive. So people who are out there talking about employment statistics and different things, I think they ignore the monetary policy, and I think they're likely to be asleep at the switch that our economy is not great. We have some real danger signs, and I have to admit, I'm not an economist. You probably have a much better handle on those economic issues and monetary policy than I do. And I think the average American is going to look at some of these things and say, look, M1 and M2 and M3, I don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
But here again, I think, is a way for the average person who says, look, I'm busy, I'm raising kids, I go to work. Economics isn't my forte. I'm not going to read a bunch of economics textbooks. I'm not going to understand all the monetary policy. Here's a simple way to know that we're in trouble. There has been a suggestion that we should audit the Fed and find out, the Fed is a huge part of our government. The head of it is appointed by the president, but it's a really kind of a quasi-private organization. We don't know what it has on its balance sheet. We don't know really, the public's never gotten a real look at what they're doing. And so there's a bill, let's audit the Fed. Well, almost everybody who has to address it pays lip service and says, well, that sounds like a good idea, because of course it's a good idea that the public should know that there should be basic transparency. That's a safety valve. And yet that bill goes nowhere. And we continue to not know anything. So let's say that you had money in a bank, and you called the bank and said, I'd like to come down and look at the figure of how much I actually have in the bank. And I'd like to look at your bank and see, are you really solvent? And the bank said, no, we're not going to let you, and hung up the phone. How confident would you feel about the money you have in the bank? Well, if it's not terribly confident, which I suspect is the way you would feel, that's the way you ought to feel about monetary policy in the United States. Because we just don't know, and our servants in public office refuse to let us know.
Right. Everyone should watch the newsreels from the late 1920s and early 1930s, when people went to the bank and tried to withdraw the little money they had in there, and there would be literally thousands of people online, and there was no money in the bank. And that's where people entrusted their money, at the bank. So people didn't have money at home in jars. They had it at the bank. So without that money, everyone was broke. And the banks closed, people lost their money. And yet, even back then, we were on a gold standard. So you think that each dollar would be backed by gold, and there would always be enough money to give back to the people. Now, it may not be immediately that day. They may have to wait 24 hours, but they would get it. But they did not. And then the only way we were able to start paying people back is when we devalued the dollar, devalued the price of gold, basically, versus the dollar, and people started getting some of their money back. But what they got back was only like 43% of what they put in, and people never even realized that. I've said this before, and I'll repeat myself for the 90th time. I said, next time I give a speech, I'm going to ask somebody for a Rolex watch or something like that, or a expensive Boulevard watch, and I'm going to go to the dollar store and buy a dollar watch, like a Superman watch, plastic one, and I'm going to exchange it with them. And I'm going to say, well, thank you very much. I'll wear your Boulevard here in exchange for the Boulevard watch. Take my dollar watch. And of course, the person will object. He wants his watch back. It's 17 jewel or whatever. And I'll say, well, why are you complaining? You have a watch. What does your watch do that mine doesn't? And the answer is nothing. So I said, don't complain. I think it's an even Steven. Thank you very much for your watch. Well, the person would go crazy, right? Well, that's what the government did when they took the silver out of their coins and they dropped the gold standard. They said, well, here's a plastic Superman watch or Spider-Man watch, which I do have at home, by the way. I found it in the parking lot. And and I do wear it once in a while, and people laugh at it. But and in exchange for a watch that had 17 jewels and gold and whatever on it, and may cost $1,000, same thing. And people don't think that way. We actually think that we have a monetary system that works, and it doesn't work. What bothers me is, I'm sorry, Gabe.
Well, I was just going to say, in the crisis in 2008, 2009, we have FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, that's supposed to, protect us. If there's some problem, they have the money sitting there to pay us up to a certain amount so that we don't lose anything. They did not. And if the government hadn't come in and bailed out AIG and bailed out a bunch of other people, FDIC did not have enough money to cover it. And so we're constantly told by government that they're going to somehow magically guarantee everything. It's a lie. And well, look at the whole housing thing. The government's been helping everybody for so long, making it easier for everybody to borrow money. And what they really did is to create a situation in which people thought, well, there's no way I can lose on buying a house. And they encourage people, both in banking and private citizens like you and I, to make foolish decisions. We were encouraged to do that by governmental policy. And we just, look, life is, it ain't easy, but you and I and everybody else, if we work, we can trade, we can build we can paint our house, it'll look nicer, we can get new furniture, we'll continue to grow and get better. We don't need government to give us some wham bam, here's some way that we get instantly rich. And so working together in a market economy, we're not all going to be rich, but over time we're going to get more wealthy and more wealthy. That's the way the world has worked, thank goodness. But when government gets involved and decides that we can do it all without any work, or that everybody can get something for free, it always screws up. And that's our history. And yet the government's going to, I have no doubt that given their philosophy, that they'll create a new bubble in housing and we'll go through the same thing all over again. Because it's good politics while the stuff hasn't hit the fan yet. It's good politics for those in office. And when the stuff does hit the fan, there's other people to point to and blame.
That's right. When I was growing up, one thing that was jammed into my head constantly was debt is bad. Debt is bad. Stay out of debt. Whatever you do, save, spend within your means, and produce something. And those are things that you never hear today. You don't hear save. You don't hear invest. You don't hear produce. You hear spend. You hear charge. Look at the car commercials. 0% financing, zero maintenance for 1 year, zero payments for 3 months, zero amount of registration fees. They give you the 5 zeros. In other words, the cars are free, but this car that really should be $3,000 or $4,000 is $47,000. And should you miss one payment by 1 day, you go from 0% financing to 13.99% financing. And on $47,000, unless you have a real good job and you have plenty of money in the bank, you're finished. And this is where we're going today. And no one wants to see it.
And in fact, Joe, you've got folks like Robert Reich, the former Clinton-era labor secretary, and someone who's supposed to know economics, who tells us that consumer spending, creates jobs.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I read that in your Common Sense, by the way.
Even as he tells you that, he says it induces businesses to create jobs. So who really creates jobs? Jobs are not created unless someone has money to invest in a business and a product and takes that risk. And it's not to say that consumer spending isn't hugely important, because consumer spending, the consumer should be king. And when they spend money, that sends a signal that they want a certain product, and by golly, business better produce that product or they're going to be in trouble.
Right.
So this isn't a put down to consumers. Consumers are hugely important, but for people who've been Secretary of the Department of Labor, not to understand that when you need a job, you don't go to Walmart and stop somebody in one of the aisles who's shopping there and say, hey, can I have a job? They don't have a job. They're there spending money.
That's right.
It's the folks who have invested that money who have the ability to give you a job. And I mean, that's just simple, and yet we don't understand it. And I go back to President Bush, George W. Bush, after 9/11, when there's a lot of different things you could say to the people of this country. And what was his message? His message was, go shopping.
Right. I never forget that. When that was said, I said, it's over. It's all over. I did the other day, I guess it was last night, in fact, the president had a open forum. What do they call that when they
Town hall.
Town hall. Thank you. Everyone in the studio's got to correct me, you know. And by the way, I hate everybody here. I want you to know officially. But you hate me too. Thank you very much. It's nice that you can say that to people around here. They don't shut you off. But
You'd love to see that mutual feeling.
And what's interesting is that I'm addicted to that program, Shark Tank, because I've invested into many businesses, and I've done that on a very small scale, not at the scale that they have. But I identify with everything they talk about. And my wife said, "You can watch that all day long." I said, "I can, because I relive my past through them." But and I think it's an excellent program. But every once in a while, I'll channel surf just to see what's going on. And on the next station up was the town hall. And every time I clicked on, Obama was making a comment to the effect that he says, well, we are working on a program too, and then fill in the blank. And then I try again, and he says, well, what we're doing is we're working on legislation too. And then I come back again. He says, well, we're working with the Republicans and the Democrats to ensure that. And I said, wait a minute. This country is not run by Republicans, Democrats, bureaucrats. It's my country. I run it. I decide what goes on, not the government. And we have become so conditioned that we are powerless. We do nothing. And we sit there and wait for the powers to be to tell us what to do, and then we'll be safe and happy and wealthy all over again. And
Yes,
just hack me off.
I remember a person that I like and that I used to respect their political intelligence. After Obama won the election in 2008, told me he was going to basically get out of politics because the problems are solved. Obama has been elected. And I thought, I wasn't a fan of Obama. I think he's the worst president since George W. Bush.
Right.
But that's kind of a joke. But I mean, I haven't been a big fan of any of them. But if I believed in Obama and he was elected, I would not think that everything had been solved. And frankly, if my favorite presidential candidate gets elected this time, which I'm pretty sure they won't, the answer isn't then to say, okay, everything's solved. This is self-government. And the very idea that the totality of your involvement in government is going to be to schlep to the polls and elect somebody who you think is good, or maybe not good, but better than the other guy, or maybe not even that much better than the other guy, but not as completely disastrous as the other guy. If you think that's going to make America a free and prosperous land, you're just fooling yourself. And that's why it's just critical that we get together. We have the internet, we have social media, but I'm telling you, it's citizens getting together, and it's not just conservatives or libertarians or the Liberty Initiative Fund agenda of protecting our liberties and making some of these reforms of the police and criminal justice system, of stopping crony capitalism and all these insider deals, of holding government accountable through term limits and through other ethics reforms and that sort of thing. These are not popular among a certain segment. This is something that the left, the right, everybody in between who are regular citizens can embrace. We've got to get together. And I gave the libertyifund.org website, but I also have a website called thisiscommonsense.com.
Right.
Every day, Monday through Friday, we do a commentary, we do a thought of the day and historical, today in freedom. We also do memes, and we try to build a community of people, left, right, and in between, who want to do the right thing. We don't all have to all agree, but we need to get together and have a conversation and stay together, and let's try to fix these problems. And so I would encourage people to go to both of those sites.
Right, Paul, we're out of time, and I wanted to mention that I am a reader of Common Sense. I subscribe. I read it nearly every single day. They're all good. As I told you once before, I don't know how you do it. I mean, I couldn't come up with this articulate commentary on specific issues. But what I like about Common Sense, it makes you think, and it makes you think beyond of what you normally hear. So you'll start learning to think, and once you start learning to think, you'll see our entire economic system, our entire political system in a different light. Well, with that, we are about out of time, Paul. I'd like to give you the next 30 seconds or so to tell our audience how they may reach you and your organizations and whatever.
Well, Liberty Initiative Fund, you can go to libertyifund.org. Thisiscommonsense.com, and one of the good things about the commentaries, they're very short, about 250 words, so you're not taking your whole day. In a minute or 2 minutes you get the idea and can comment. And then citizensincharge.org. Citizens in Charge is totally dedicated to protecting the initiative and referendum process. We don't take any political position. We don't care what your politics is or what your idea is. We think you have a right to take that idea to the public, and let's let the public decide.
Yeah. You even accept Italians, don't you?
We do.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. Paul, thank you so much for being our program. It's really an honor, and I'd like to ask you, if you would consider returning to this program at a later date?
Oh, I'd love to, Joe, and we always have fun, so please do invite me.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Paul. Goodbye.
Thanks a lot.
Wow. Paul Jacobs is just an absolutely brilliant person, and what he has done for the freedom movement, few people have attained. I've known him for years. I read his commentary almost every single day, and I always learn something. It's articulate, it's cerebral, it's, Please, let me hear from you. It's comments at libertytalkradio.com. Here, this is the end of today's broadcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support. And we'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends, but let us hear from you. Our email address is comments at libertytalkradio.com. Remember, as my wife says, you're either allowing your liberties to be taken away or you're striving to protect them. Unfortunately, folks, there is no middle ground. Until next time, this is Joe Cristiano. This is Liberty Talk Radio. Stay well. Stay tuned.
From the sun.